Okay.
Hello, everyone. We are Team 12. We are Lee, Daniel, and Qing. We will talk about Vivendi Universal case. Vivendi Universal SA is a media and telecommunications conglomerate with substantial holdings in the United States and Europe. Next. Let's see. And let's see Vivendi Universal background. 1853, a water company named CGE was created by an imperial decree of Napoleon III. 1976, CGE extended its activity into other sectors with series of takeovers. 1990, CGE began expanding into telecommunications and mass media. 1998, company changed its name to Vivendi and sold off its property and construction divisions the following year. 2000, Vivendi Universal SA is created with the merger of the Vivendi Media Empire. Next, Vivendi is a French international media giant, rivaling Time Warner that spent $77 billion on acquisitions, including the world's largest music company, Universal Music Group. In 2000, Vivendi was one of Europe's largest companies in terms of assets and revenues, with holdings in the United States that included Universal Studios Group, UMG, and USA Networks. These acquisitions cost Vivendi cash, stock, and assumed debt of over $60 billion and increased the debt from $4.32 billion at the beginning of 2000 to over $30.25 billion in 2002. Next, please. Quote, "Some of my management decisions turned wrong, but fraud, never, never, never," unquote. This statement was made by the former CEO of Vivendi Universal, Jean-Marie Messier. He is a French businessman. Vivendi former CFO, Guillaume Hennesseau. He is a French banker. They committed multiple violations of the anti-fraud books and records, internal controls and reporting provisions of the federal securities laws. Next, pass to Lee to talk about case summary.
Okay, so a class action lawsuit brought against Messier and Hennesseau in November 2009 accused the company of hiding Vivendi's true financial condition before a $46 billion three-way merger with Seagram Company and Canal Plus. The firm was in a liquidity crisis and would have problems repaying its outstanding debt and operating expense. However, Messier and Hennesseau told a completely different story in its earnings release, which we will talk about it soon. The jury decided not to hold either Messier or Hennesseau legally liable because scienter could not be proven. In other words, the court decided it could not be shown that the two officers acted with the intent to deceive other parties. Next. So how did Vivendi Universal conceal its financial problem? They technically use four methods. The first one is issuing false press release stating that the liquidity of the company was strong and excellent after the release of the 2001 financial statement to the public. On March 5th, 2002, Vivendi issued 7.25 billion in EBITDA and 2.88 billion in operation free cash flow earnings release for 2001, which was approved by Messrs. Henneso and other senior executives. The earnings were materially misleading and falsely presented Vivendi financial situation because due to legal restriction, Vivendi was unable unilaterally to access the earning and cash flow of two of its most profitable subsidiaries. Furthermore, Vivendi declared $1.44 per share dividend, but it actually borrowed against credit facility to pay the dividend. Next. The second method is using aggressive accounting principle and adjustment to increase EBITDA and meet ambitious earnings target. They did this by mainly restructuring one of its subsidiaries' allowance for bad debt, and furthermore, they prematurely recognizing revenue of 4.32 million and temporarily reducing the corporate overhead charge by $10.08 million. Next. The third method is they failing to disclose the existence of various commitment and contingency. The fourth is failing to disclose part of its investment in a transaction to acquire a share of Acct, a Polish telecommunication holding company. Next. SEC action under Section 1103 of the SOX. This section allowed the SEC to temporarily freeze certain extraordinary payment made to security law violator. Based on this provision, Messrs. Was required to relinquish his claim to a severance package of about $29.4 million, which include back pay and bonuses for the first half of 2002, and to pay a civil money penalty of $1 million and a disgorgement of $1. For Henneso, he was required to disgorge $148,149 and to pay a penalty of $1,200,000. Next.
Next, we got the discussion questions from the book. First is, what is the role of internal controls in facilitating ethical behavior in the organization? Internal controls serve several different purposes. Two of the important ones that would have helped in this case include ensuring consistency from year to year, not allowing them to change accounting practices in between years without disclosing it. And the other is preventing excessive management overrides to make adjustments. There's a lot of that going on at this company. They changed a lot of their estimates and changed the timing of a lot of their stuff. And that was all done through adjustments made by management. Internal controls would have been on top of this. Since Vivendi, it was a collection of companies from several different countries. They were dealing with a lot of different GAAP rules, especially since some of their companies were connected to the government, both Sejatel and Maroc Telecom were both partially owned by the government, so they had much different accounting rules. And so the combination of rules and then the overriding of internal controls really was the problem here. Two, why are disclosures in financial statements important? The disclosures are there because there's a lot of information that don't fit into the standard forms of the financial statements, things that need to be discussed but don't exactly have a line of their own in the financial statements. So they really needed to be there, because even though they're small and they're in footnotes and in all those pages that a lot of people don't want to read, they still have to be printed. So people that do pay attention do get that information. They were really important with the relationship with Segatel and Maroc Telecom, because they didn't control the cash flows. Any profits that they were making, they were claiming in their EBITDA, but they didn't have control of that cash, and they didn't really disclose that. So it made it look like they had a lot more liquid cash than they actually did. Third, why do financial analysts look at measures such as EBITDA and operating cash flows to evaluate financial records? A lot of the times they do this because a lot of the executives and financial analysts would say that it's a simpler way to see the cash flows that is actually liquid, the operating cash flows and whatnot. They claim that they're really hard to find in the GAAP statements, and that these other non-GAAP statements are an easy way for them to get that information out. We'll see, it's not really the best though. Next is using earnings management and aggressive accounting in EBITDA calculations just as serious as doing the same with financial statements prepared under GAAP? Not really. The problem is since GAAP doesn't have control of those non-GAAP measures, there's no consistent way that they are measured. It changes from company to company. And so GAAP can't really tell people how to do it, and the companies are allowed to do it kind of as they wish. Another problem being that this gray area that's created between these non-GAAP and GAAP statements can be discussed in press releases and the talks that the managers give to the stockholders at like annual shareholders meetings. They're allowed to use these as much as they want because it's not an official filing with the SEC. So as we saw in the earlier slides, they were making a lot of claims outside of their SEC filings that just were not true, but they can't really get in trouble because the SEC and the PCAOB only really monitor their own measurements, and they don't have a way to really monitor these outside ones. And finally, analyze the appropriateness of the provisions of Section 1103 of SOX. I think they're very important. We still see a lot of people leaving companies in shame, but keeping their ill-gotten gains. Section 1103 is the part that allows for a clawback, as it's referred to it sometimes, where those ill-gotten gains that should have been flowing back into the company or the shareholders can be brought back to the appropriate place where they really belong. We still see a lot of times where managers and whatnot leave in disgrace and they take the money with them and keep a lot of it. In fact, in this, one of the earlier slides you saw, there was a disengorgement of $1. He had way overspent company money, far more than $1, but they couldn't really get it back because it was money he had spent on a wife's wedding and different things like this. And so they just got back what they had to make some sort of effort to make it look like they were getting their money back. But in the end, they only made him pay $1 for all that lavish lifestyle that he lived on the company funds. Next, we'll go to our multiple choice questions. Under Section 1103, how much does Messier have to pay in his penalty? Well, we saw in one of the earlier slides that he had to pay $1 in disengorgement, and he lost a $29.4 million pension. But the answer is A. He only had to pay $1 million in penalties for causing over $30 million in his personal taking and even much more financial damage to the company. And our second question is, how is Vivendi able to pay dividends when they are at a negative cash flow? We briefly mentioned this earlier, but even though they had negative cash flows, they made their paperwork look like they had positive cash flows, so it was legal to pay a dividend. But they did have to, letter C, take out an additional $1.87 billion in loans. That was to pay the $1.44 billion in dividends and the additional taxes that the French government imposes on dividend payments. And that is about all. As you've seen, without internal control, things can get out of hand real quick. The tone at the top can really affect how internal controls are worked and if they're even paid attention to. And without internal controls and without a strong tone at the top and the ability for people in the middle and bottom to speak up, the problems can get way out of hand. They went from $4 billion in debt to $30 billion in debt in 2 years, just because people weren't speaking up and the people at the top had the power to override everything that was done. It's an unfortunate story. One of the footnotes in the story is Vivendi is now just starting to admit the damage that was done in the fire at the Universal Music Group's warehouses in LA. And we still don't know a monetary value of what was lost because they haven't been honest. But they have started to admit that they lost a lot of the master recordings of bands like Nirvana and Metallica, which beyond the monetary value, there's a lot of artistic value that was lost also. The people at the top just aren't willing to admit it and didn't keep very good control, and that's how they ended up where they are. Thank you very much.